Welcome to the Time for a Reset podcast, the podcast where I, Paul Frampton, interview senior marketers on the big issues of the day and the thing that they want to see reset with an ever-changing landscape. Welcome back to another episode of Time for a Reset. This morning, or even this afternoon, I'm delighted to be joined by Alison Sagar. Alison and I have known each other for nearly 10 years. Alison started her career in marketing at British Airways. She was then VP of marketing for Amex for quite some time, then became the CMO for PayPal in the UK and was a big part of that growth journey for PayPal. And then she decided to actually enter into consulting. So she spent 2 years consulting on smaller types of business, anything through from 5 people up to 1,000 people. So I think Alison's going to have a really interesting view of marketing in big corporates and then marketing as you're trying to grow a smaller business. And she is on Monday, I believe, Alison, is going to start a new job in an exciting new role for a scale-up business called Snappy Gifts, which is an enterprise platform that, through the power of giving, drives employee engagement. So she's going to be global head of marketing there, working with a team both in New York and Tel Aviv. So hopefully I did that justice for you, Alison.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks for having me on your podcast today, Paul. It's been fantastic working with you. And I've also really enjoyed listening to some of the fantastic podcasts you've had already. So I'm hoping this one will be as good as those.
Great. Well, I'm looking forward to your take on things, because from all the time that we've spent together, you always give a really incisive kind of direct view. So I'm looking forward to that. So you know where we start. We start by you waving your magic wand. So what would be your reset?
Thanks, Paul. So what I'd love to hit reset on, if I had a magic wand, is the relationship between marketing and the CFO. And in particular, just really kind of getting fantastic alignment around the marketing metrics that matter. So, you know, I've as you said, spent many, many years working in big businesses and smaller businesses. And you know, sort of in my heart of hearts, I'm a complete fan of, you know, the long and the short of it and the power that marketing has to drive growth. And, you know, the most fantastic parts of the role are when you're connecting with customers and, you know, seeing the impact of the work that you do on the business. But I'm slightly ashamed to say I probably, you know, in the last sort of 5 or 10 years, have spent more time with the finance departments than I have directly talking to customers. And while I'm ashamed to say that, I think that actually has been such a critical part of particularly the success that we had in PayPal, because such a big part of a marketer's role is to, you know, build trust and build a great relationship with the CFO so that they feel confident to back you, you know, when you are asking for investment. And they also feel confident to back you when you know, when perhaps you need to reduce your investment and that investment needs to go elsewhere to the business, and to back you in the sense of aligning around kind of, you know, what your goals should be based on the investment that the company's decided to make for you. So that's what I'd love to hit reset on, because I just truly believe that, you know, marketers really can and should own the narrative around growth. But to do that, they really need to partner with finance and have that fantastic partnership to establish themselves as a commercial thought leader in the business. So, and that it kind of might seem a bit obvious, you know, what I've just said.
Not at all. I don't think. I mean, people have maybe touched on a marketer being a little bit more commercial, but I think the point around that relationship and the importance of that relationship between the CMO and CFO, I think is a really key one. And having known you for a while, I know that you very much kind of focus on commercially led marketing. And let's face it, a lot of folks in the marketing industry could be challenged for maybe not being commercial enough and being a little bit too orientated on the work that goes out the door. And maybe claiming to talk to customers, but it not being represented in their work. So I think it's a super topic to talk about.
Yeah. And I think that's where, having an amazing team is such an important part, because, CMOs, I think, do have a natural bias, right? They're slightly more on the creative side and slightly more on the commercial side. And I think, the real art to success is to make sure that the team that you build around you, you build that complementary skill set, so the team as a whole can deliver kind of all the aspects of the business, and that there's a real appreciation for what I describe as the best of both. Because being super commercial without having a great creative, is kind of interesting, but it's not going to drive the growth that you need. Equally, if you're super creative but you haven't got that sort of analytical discipline around targeting or around securing the investment to deliver that great creative, you're not going to be able to get it out the door. So I think ultimately, there's a real need as a CMO to be able to unleash the power of both. But often, and that's where I think that sort of marketing sometimes doesn't have the influence that it could and should have. That creative side is the real strength, but yet the commercial side is a little bit lacking. So I think the real trick is to get that best of both and to build a team around you so that you've always got key elements of that in your team. And I also see time and time again, there's that brilliant phrase, I think it's a Spanish phrase, or it's a proverb that says, cobbler's children wear no shoes. And I think it's just I think it kind of brings to life the challenge that you have, because marketers by definition are so busy trying to communicate and engage our customers that sometimes we forget to communicate and engage some of the key stakeholders inside the business. And I do see the CFO as one of the most important and influential voices at the leadership table and at the board, obviously. And so by definition, they are a critical stakeholder that a marketer has to manage and have a fantastic partnership on. So that's where I kind of see that reset needing to happen.
No, I love that. And I think you articulated it beautifully there, Alison. So I want to dig into that a little bit. I mean, where you just ended there, I think there have been other podcasts and conversations we've had around marketing's becoming more of a science, and then others around you've got to really lean in internally to orchestrate marketing. And I think all of those things are true. But maybe in a second, I'd love to come back to how do you get that right balance between leaning outside, listening to the customer, to trends, with building influence internally. But before maybe we do that, what I really liked about what you said at the beginning was that you invested a lot of personal time in building relationships with the CFOs that you partnered with. Could you maybe just give us a bit of an insight into what that looked like? What did you actually do, and how did you build that relationship? Because I'm sure there are lots of marketers sitting there thinking, well, I try to avoid going to the CFO's office because usually when I do, I come out with less money.
Yeah. So, I think the answer to that question is actually, deeply embedded in the basic marketing principles, right? So number one is know your audience, right? Get to know your audience. I think I was actually laughing last week because I was reading Mark Ritson's article.
Yeah.
Writing a great marketing plan. I don't know if you saw it. It's very funny. As usual, Mark Ritson's articles make me laugh.
A bit of humour to it as well.
And anyway, it was just really funny because he talked about, how you put together a sort of 12 to 20 page pack, and, and then you go through the segmentation and targeting and, knowing your audience, all these good stuff. And the key message he kind of landed with was the fact that basically the entire audience is sort of very vaguely interested throughout the presentation. But as soon as the budget slide on the last page, that's when they all sit up to take notice. And, and I think at the end of the day, you've got to know your audience, right? What do CFO and boards care about, right? Ultimately, yes, there are three stakeholders that every business worries about, shareholders, customers, and employees. But ultimately, the finance team are really, really, really focused on making sure that the shareholders think the company is fantastic, and either the shareholders or the investors or the people providing angel capital. So, ultimately, that's what they're interested in doing. And so, really understanding, what messages they need to tell their their stakeholders and how to do that successfully, how to paint a picture of growth, and how you're going to deliver that growth. Frankly, you can be incredibly helpful to a CFO, particularly if their skill set is not in communications, right? By helping them craft that message to their audiences. So I think making it very easy for them to craft those messages and justify those investments is an important element. And to do that, you kind of do need to understand what you look at every day. I remember talking to a CFO once about TVRs, and of course they look at you somewhat blankly, right? I think it's a sports car, you've got to translate your metrics into what's meaningful for them, and what they understand is revenue and expenses. So you've got to talk that language, and if you're going to ask for X million dollars of investment, you really do need to be putting a revenue number against it, and make sure that if the revenue number is partly delivered by you and partly delivered by your sales team, that your sales director is also on board, right, with that number. So I've seen time and time again marketers put metrics up in front of CEOs and CFOs, but there's no context for those metrics, so they're somewhat meaningless, and I think that's a real risk. So number one for me is, get to know your finance director, get to know what metrics are important to them, get to know how they report marketing spend. Again, if you look at the report and accounts in a company and you look at the number that's against the, what is classified as marketing expense, when you actually understand how big that number is and what a very, very small portion of that number you as a marketing manager are actually managing, you realize that the entire cost of the sales force, all of the sales incentives, everything, they're all bundled up into that one number. And so you understanding how what you do fits into the bigger picture and what the choices and trade-offs are is kind of really important. So I think number one, that's definitely know your audience. Number two is, again, classic marketing insight, right? Which is, you've got to build trust. And no more so, frankly, than with an audience that is highly logical. Almost exclusively, they have a, there's
one side of the brain a lot more.
There's no one CFO, right? There are lots of different flavors of CFO, and I've worked with very different types. But generally, they do have a strong bias to logic over emotion and a strong bias to data over creative. But I think getting to know them, getting to know how they want to manage risk and make them a partner of yours and your biggest advocate. I've had the privilege of working with some fantastic CFOs in my time. And actually, I would say pivotal to the success of us in the UK, getting the investments to be the first country in the world at PayPal to actually invest in broadcast TV and broadcast advertising nationally. It was actually the CFO who spent his time working with me to tweak and position the metrics and build the case out from a geo test to demonstrate how we could scale this nationally and the revenue number that would be associated with it. And it's very, very interesting because his belief was founded in my belief, but he was able to translate it and help me translate it into an insight and a revenue plan, frankly,
and a model, I guess.
The global team bought into, and more importantly, that the UK MD signed up to and said, yes, we will deliver this revenue number. And at the end of the day, it is a partnership, right? Because marketing is not working alone. It's not spending marketing dollars to generate marketing revenue. It's spending the company's money to generate company revenue, and creating that partnership is really key. So that trust is really important, and to establish that trust and the belief in the power of integrated marketing, they need to have good insights.
I think you made some brilliant points there. I mean, what I've heard is whether it's the finance director, CFO, or the sales director, if you partner and co-create strategies with them, then you've got a lot more chance that they're going to get approved internally. Also, this balance of storytelling with the right numbers. The CFO still needs to tell stories, and actually a CMO can help them to tell stories. But as you said, the CFO is going to usually bring more of the logic and the kind of science of the numbers. So I think there's some really great points there. Now, let's just go back briefly to this marketing metrics. Called that out right at the beginning. So, I mean, are there a handful of metrics that you think every business should have for marketing?
Yeah, well, so I guess the first thing is, again, I think the metrics that marketing need are the ones that help the marketing organization contribute to the business metrics. And I think one of the best articulations, the pithiest articulation of business metrics that matter was actually from Bob Swan, who was an absolutely fantastic CFO at eBay and PayPal when I was there, and I think has recently gone on to be CEO of Intel. So, super impressive guy, and he did an incredible job of communicating what the business metrics were that mattered to the organization and getting the whole organization rallied around those. And it was very pithy because it was EPS, NPS, and ENPS. So for him, earnings per share, because obviously it's a traded business, so the financial metrics, NPS, which was a really important nod from a CFO to the importance of customer satisfaction and customer service. Again, really crucial in not just in engaging the marketing department, but this customer services teams and the engineering teams and the product teams, because of course NPS is really a metric that reflects on your entire customer experience. And then ENPS, which is what they called employee net promoter score, which is this idea of how important it is for your employees to be the face of your brand and the face of your business, because ultimately any business is only as good as the people that work there, right? The technology, we talk a lot about technology, but ultimately technology has been built by brilliant and talented people. So he did an amazing job of creating pithy metrics for the business, and then off the back of that, every team was able to create metrics that laddered up to that. So when we were looking at the metrics that mattered at PayPal, we were thinking about, okay, so what are the right metrics? What are the important metrics that contribute to growing earnings per share? Well, ultimately, what we can do is, we can help acquire customers cost effectively and make sure that the value of those customers is as high as possible by cross-selling and driving customer engagement on the back book. So we spend a lot of time, obviously, on CPA and CLV, customer lifetime value and cost per acquisition. And they have millions of different acronyms for the same thing, like CAC and CPA, whatever. But, in the heart of it, what it costs you to acquire a customer, and then the value of that customer over a 1 or 3 year time period. And again, it's important not to just look at one side of that, right? It's not, if you just look at CPA, which some CFOs do, it doesn't tell the whole story, because CPA without lifetime value is completely meaningless. So, for EPS, we spend a lot of time on things like CPA and CLV, but also just on the discipline of managing a marketing budget and spending what you said you were going to be spending. And if you were spending it in the time frame that you were going to plan to spend it, that you let them know, and it got reallocated to working activity. So I think EPS and the key ones I think that are really important are CPA, CLV, and being transparent with what you're spending money on, being transparent about the returns that you're generating from the working capital that you're investing, and building that. On NPS, again, I think as a marketer, we spent a lot of time thinking about how we engage customers and how we measure customer engagement. For us, the main metrics we used were net new active customers. So the number we acquired or reactivated less the ones that churned. That's a super powerful metric because it obviously gives you that sort of view of growth, but it's not one-sided. Often marketing are charged with only acquiring customers, but ultimately you need to own the whole funnel.
No, and I like the balanced scorecards that you talked about. That was put in that paper, I mean, it did feel like you're looking at all different aspects. And when I listened to you talking, you evidently have spent a lot of time understanding the language and the lexicon of the finance department, because you talk about it very effortlessly. I'm not sure all marketeers necessarily have lent quite so heavily into that. Do you feel that, like with the CFO and the CEO, do you feel that marketing is becoming more important to them? Do they see it rising up the agenda, or do you see them actually thinking it's becoming less important?
Yeah, so I think, yeah, I obviously am a little biased, right? So I obviously think that it's marketing's more important, ever more important. I think what's tricky in answering that question is I think what people's perception of what marketing is has really kind of diverged over time. And so I think, and that's in part because what the marketing department does in different companies, I think, has diverged quite a lot over the last sort of 10 to 20 years.
Yeah.
And I think, if you work in a B2C business, you're going to have one very different view of what marketing is to if you work in a B2B business. And I think your CFO and the view of the board and the CEO and the CFO's view of what marketing is actually is a little bit contingent on what marketing is in their industry and in their business. So I guess, like, to give an example of that, I think, I'm a big believer in brand and performance marketing. I think it's really, really crucial. And my bias and background has been predominantly consumer, but obviously when I worked at American Express, I worked on the business side, but it was small business, so it still was very behaved like consumer. I think if you work in consumer and SMB, marketing is very clear, and it can be it is essentially an extremely commercial function because it's driving revenue. I think when you start moving into B2B business, particularly enterprise businesses, what marketing is a little different, because actually there's a little bit of a blurry line about, is it sales enablement or is it marketing? Where's the line drawn between sales and marketing? And I think in a B2B business, more and more, in a B2B business, I think more and more it's worth thinking about sales and marketing as one thing. So I think in B2B businesses, as you start thinking about sales and marketing as one thing, you really do unleash the power of that sort of lead to live cycle. But you absolutely have this other part, which is about the value proposition, which is much more around the brand and what the brand stands for and how salespeople sell it. So I think whether it's B2B or B2C, there's the sort of breadth of skill set within marketing is now so wide that it's by definition more important. And at the end of the day, so information has been transformational over the last 20 years, right? But that's kind of creates a number of challenges, right? So on the one hand, it means that customer experience is super important, because as a marketer, what you say and what you do, you have to be very, very aligned. But on the other hand, there's so much information out there, it's really hard to cut through. So marketing is even more important, because great, brave marketing that cuts through and gets people to notice and consider something that they've not thought of before, is ever more important. So I would argue that absolutely, I think there's two areas that marketing is more important. Firstly, in just making sure that, your value proposition and what the company stands for and what you say is super, super clear, so everybody can communicate that, and your customer experience can communicate that, your salespeople can communicate that. And then the other piece is just in terms of just being able to cut through, right? Having the art and the science to get the right message in front of somebody, to get them to stop and think and change their behavior. So I would argue that absolutely, obviously I'm biased, but yes, for sure.
Look, I hear you, and I think you articulate very nicely the fact that what other departments have got kind of clear tram lines, like they start and stop in certain places, finance, sales, whereas marketing has almost got this responsibility to connect and join and make other things kind of work well together, because it's got to ensure that the storytelling and the purpose of the company is clear externally and internally, and then it's got to make sure that you're connected to the customer, and that you're pulling that insight in, and then that, as you say, you do have that high impact and the right messaging that drives people to do something. So it is broader. But I guess my follow-up question would be like, do you think it's elevating up the actual board agenda? So would a CEO that probably writes the board agenda, would they put marketing higher up the list now? Obviously a CMO like you would, because that's your kind of world. But do you think as a CEO wants to talk more about marketing than they did maybe 5-10 years ago, or they just want to talk about growth and they don't necessarily put marketing and growth quite in the same bucket?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like they want to talk about growth, and so if in order to get marketing into that narrative, your marketing leaders need to be positioning themselves as growth leaders, and I do see numerous people doing that, and I think, I also think that what helps marketing as a discipline is having CEOs that you can look to who have come up to a CEO role from a CMO role, for example. And I think that people are only going to be able to do that if they can demonstrate their ability to see the whole commercial picture, and to sort of really think about what needs to be achieved from a stakeholder perspective, and a deeper understanding of kind of the shareholder part of that. So I think it's a challenge for marketers to get that experience early enough on in their career to feel comfortable doing it later. And I have to say that I think that the separation of product in particular in tech businesses has kind of put what I describe as downward pressure on the role of marketing. The number of companies that I've talked to who have chief product officer on their C-suite, as well as a chief technology officer, as well as a chief commercial officer, for example. And then it starts to get a bit busy, right, around that table, and you've sort of got a lot of people there. And so then there's always a question: well, do I need to add an extra person to that table? So I do think there's downward pressure, but I equally think that the opportunity for there to be upward pressure and for marketing to grab hold of that broader growth agenda and demonstrate that it can think strategically about not just creative, but also the sort of the importance of value proposition and innovation and product development and service development, and the pushing forward of the value proposition and owning that as part of the agenda is the way to get the seat at the table, because ultimately the value proposition is the business, right, at the end of the day. And I think that
absolutely, that is
territory to be working in.
Lovely. I really like that. And I love your point around product and downward pressure. So do you think this shift towards more digital, direct to consumer data technology, is that a downward or upwards pressure? Is that making marketing be seen as more important? And how would you say it's changing the kind of operating model for someone like you and how the teams that you build and work?
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where it's pulling in both directions, right? So I think what's really interesting about the sort of the data and tech side is actually making the art and science of marketing quite technical. And on one hand, that's great, and it is great, and CFOs love it, right? Because they've got numbers and they can see things and they can measure it. But equally, I think you can really get lost in the data and the detail, and you can people can spin their wheels and serve ads and get really deep into optimizing something and miss out on the bigger picture. So I think on the one hand, it's sort of making it more technical and actually in a way pushing marketers sort of down into the detail and down into the data. And the challenge is, how do you lift yourself back up to see the bigger picture and focus on the value proposition? but equally, I think, it also is making it easier for marketers to tell the story to people who understand data. And so in a way, it gives them, if they can harness it and grab it, it gives them the opportunity to almost provide more evidence to the power of what they do, and that again leads them to have more influence, because it allows them to talk more about how the choices that they and their team make can influence growth. So in terms of operating model though, I think ultimately it is about how do you structure yourself to make sure that you've got those disciplines really working well, because the worst case scenario is you've got lots of average, and what you really want is to bring together the best of creative and the best of brand and the best of strategy with the best of performance and growth driving and growth hacking. And so to do that, you do need you need to bring them together.
Because it's a lot of orgs have separate brand teams, separate performance marketing teams. They might have some in-house kind of digital people, and to your point, actually, you need to be able to knit those things together. And what I often see is, coming back to your first point, is that the data and analytics has helped get buy-in from CFO to digital, but the problem is the measurement is possibly flawed from the early days and needs to be up improved and changed. And actually, I think a lot of marketers are a little bit not quite sure how to go and have that conversation about changing the attribution and the measurement model, because they've sold it in the past. So we're stuck in this world where everyone's still measuring things on last click, which is the equivalent of giving leaflets out just in front of someone going into a store.
Yeah.
Do you see that challenge?
Oh, absolutely. And like, I could talk on attribution for months. I do think it's, there's a brilliant phrase from Benjamin Disraeli, right? Lies, damn lies, and statistics. Yeah. 3 types of lies. And, it's so true, right? I mean, you can tell pretty much any story with numbers. And I think, you just really need to be focused on telling the right story for your customers and the right story for the business, and having the confidence to understand what is true and what is perhaps a beautiful packaging of correlation rather than causation.
Easier to deliver.
At the heart of the challenges marketers have. So I think I think the getting to the bottom of that and doing it in a way that's smart. So I like to think of it as sort of big picture, little picture. I was about to say big fish, little fish.
I thought you were going to say big fish, little fish.
But I know, exactly. Big picture, which is you've got to find a way to tell a story that links back to those 3 key metrics that the CFO cares about, Bob Swan's EPS, MPS, EMPS, right? And how what you're doing is contributing to those. But equally, I think the real art to storytelling is little picture, right? Which is those experiments that you do that plant a seed of truth. And I genuinely believe that test and control is the right way to do that. You can't say that, in this tiny test and control, this happened, and therefore I can extrapolate that to the whole market, and therefore, isn't it amazing? But you can draw a set of conclusions that you can apply and say, this is what happened in this situation. And if even half of that were true when I scaled it globally, I would deliver this. And I genuinely think that combining the ability to connect what you do to the big picture business metrics, plus the ability to take a test and control and tell a story around how, if you applied that globally, and if you assumed this set of things, this is what you could expect to happen, is the type of logic and the type of storytelling that will resonate with a CFO and will get you where you need to go. So I think the trick is making sure that you don't just have your performance marketers and your creative team and your sort of value proposition and product marketing team and potentially your partnership marketing team, but that you also have that team or person that knits the story together across the 4 areas. Because if people get split into 4 groups, and I've seen that, I saw at PayPal, they went through an organizational change where they like literally had brand marketing and performance marketing reporting into 2 different C-suite executives. I think when you break the bonds between those 2 things, you lose the real power of marketing, which is that sort of multiplier effect, right? Of integrated marketing and the psychology of surrounding your customers with messaging that resonates with them. So I just believe that knitting together of the story, the big picture and little picture, and the performance and brand, and knitting that together as one package, that sort of where 1 + 1 = 3 is really how to unleash the power of marketing and drive real transformational growth.
Wonderful. I think that you've just given a really nice summary of a lot of the things that we talked about. So we're running short of time. So I wanted to kind of end by getting a little bit more of a personal kind of reflection from you, Alison. You're obviously starting a new job on Monday, very excited, new kind of scale up company. What when you look at yourself as a marketeer, what is the thing that you're going to kind of do differently to try and make sure that marketing really is helping to lead the business and do some of the things you said?
Yeah, so I have recently started mentoring a number of different people, and through some of the consulting that I've done in the past and the board roles that I've had in the past, I've had the privilege of working with some super, super talented marketers. And in almost all of their cases, they are absolutely brilliant, but they have come up through sort of a single stack, if you like, so they don't have the breadth. So they might be super brilliant at brand and creative, but have no experience at all of managing marketing budgets and sort of managing performance marketing or managing media. Or they are super brilliant at lead management and have created a fantastic B2B funnel for enterprise sales, but a little bit weaker in terms of skill sets around value proposition, and then how you might take that value proposition into more of a messaging state. So I've been doing a lot of mentoring, and if I'm honest, I hadn't created time for it in the past. I was so busy doing my work, what I was doing, that I hadn't created time. Obviously, I would mentor my team members, but not necessarily people from outside of my business. And I think it's been incredibly valuable for me personally, and I hope very valuable for them in terms of growing the next generation of marketing leaders who can kind of span across the different parts of marketing and knit the story together.
Nice. What a wonderful place to leave it. I mean, Alison, I think you've taken us on a great journey from remember what the core role of marketing is in a business, and remember who your audience is, whether it's internal or external, the importance of partnering internally, and as you just kind of shared, the importance of the big kind of brand piece, but also the small picture piece, and experimenting and testing and constantly improving, and as you say, helping marketers to become rounded, because we've got lots of people that come into the industry through digital that maybe haven't got the breadth of experience that you have, and lots of people that have come from the experience space that maybe haven't lent as heavily as someone like you has into the commercial or MarTech side of it. So I think there's some fabulous insights in there. So thank you so much for making the time, Alison.
Thank you, Paul, for having me, and have a great day.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Time for a Reset. I hope you enjoyed this one as much as I did. We'll be back talking to a senior marketeer very soon. Make sure you don't miss out on any new episodes by subscribing on Apple, Spotify or SoundCloud, and leave us a review at timeforareset.co.uk.